Hey class, today we're going to continue on with section 3. In the last lesson, we learned about epithelial tissue, and this section we're going to learn about connective tissue. Again, it's going to be another section that is very big and very content heavy, so it's one, if you need to rewind any part of this video, please do so. If you need to ask me any questions, please ask. So let's go ahead and get started. Connective tissue is found everywhere in the body that connects to body parts. The key word for connective tissue is to connect. It also includes the most abundant and widely distributed tissues of the entire body. Not only does it function in connecting things, but it also functions in protection, supporting, and binding. So, some characteristics of connective tissue. There are variations in blood supplies. Some tissues are well vascularized, means they have a good blood supply to them. Other ones have a poor blood supply or are avascular. These things that are avascular tend to be slow to heal whenever they're injured. These are things like tendons and ligaments and cartilage. These three things tend to heal very slowly whenever you injure them compared to, let's say, a bone. Another characteristic of connective tissue is that the key component is it has an extracellular matrix. The extracellular matrix is defined as non-living material that surrounds living cells. So think of extra like terrestrial, it's outside the cell. So it's a matrix located outside the cell. Now, there are two main elements of an extracellular matrix. The first one is called ground substance, and the second one is called fibers. If we're going to start with ground substance, it is mostly water. It does have some adhesion proteins and polysaccharide molecules within it. Adhesion proteins, what they do is they help serve as the glue for the connective tissue to attach themselves, and it helps give the connective tissue function of connecting. It connects things, hold things. There are also polysaccharides. Polysaccharides, all they are sugars, and these help trap water and create like a gel-like consistency. So again, those sugars help create a sticky substance. The second thing, fibers, there are three major types that we talk about. There are collagen fibers, these are typically white, and these provide strength for the cell and the tissue. There's elastic fibers, these are generally yellow, and these allow different tissues to stretch and then recoil back to their shape. And then there are reticular fibers, and these help form the skeleton or help form the framework of these different tissues. Now, all connective tissue consists of living cells that have an extracellular matrix, but each of these cells are going to differ depending on the type of cell that they're made up of, what type of fibers they're made up of. For example, some cells are made up of more collagen fibers and other ones have more elastic fiber in them. And the last one is the number of fibers in the matrix. Some cells have a ton of fibers and other cells have very little. So the type of connective tissue that we're going to talk about today, and we have here ordered from the most rigid to the softest, in other words, the most fluid, are going to be bone is the hardest, followed by cartilage, then dense connective tissue, loose connective tissue, and then the softest and the most fluid is blood. So let's start off. Bone. Bone is often called osseous tissue. The reason it's called osseous tissue is because it's made up of cells called osteocytes. So anytime you hear the word osteo, like osteoporosis, this is going to have to do with bones. Bone cells sit in something called lacunae, which are cavities, and they are basically hard matrices of calcium salts. Hence why they always tell you, make sure you get enough calcium for your bones. Bones function to protect and support the body. They're located all throughout the body as part of your skeletal system. And For additional information, they contain a large number of collagen fibers, hence why they are the strongest and they are the toughest. Here is a picture of bone. Bone, here's your osteocytes, the little black dots, located in lacunae, which are rings. So this whole thing we're going to learn when we get to the skeletal chapter is called an osteon. And this makes up the matrix of bone. The second one we're going to talk about is cartilage. Now, this is still relatively hard compared to your other connective tissue, but it is more flexible than bone. Instead of being made up of osteocytes, it is made up of its own type of cell. The major type of cell in cartilage are called chondrocytes, which is a name for a cartilage cell. Now, fun fact, if you've ever taken advanced biology, sharks are categorized in a specific group called chondrocytes because sharks are made up of mostly cartilage. Now, there are three types of cartilage. There's hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, and elastic cartilage, and we're going to talk about each one of those individually. The first one we're going to talk about is hyaline cartilage. If we were going to describe hyaline cartilage and give a characteristic of it, it is actually full of collagen fibers that give it a glassy, rubbery matrix. It has a blue-white appearance. So again, that collagen fibers gives it its strength. Therefore, it's able to perform the functions of support and flexibility. Some places in the body where you're going to find hyaline cartilage include your trachea. That's your windpipe that you breathe air down into your lungs. It's also found where your ribs attach to your breastbone. It's found at the end of long bones. In fact, the entire fetal skeleton before birth is made up of hyaline cartilage and it is then converted into bone. And it's still found on the epiphyseal or the growth plates in long bones. Now, this is actually the most widespread type of cartilage, so if you had to put additional information down, I would know that. Here is a good picture of your hyaline cartilage. This is your ribs, here is your breastplate, and it's found right between the two, and it helps connect those two together. The next two types that we're going to talk about are elastic and fibrocartilage. Now, elastic cartilage is yellow in appearance, and it is the most pliable of the cartilages because it has elastic fibers. Remember, elastic fibers are generally yellow in color, and they help provide the function of elasticity, or it's flexible. It's able to stretch and then recoil back into its shape. A good location for elastic cartilage are going to be things like your external ear. You can fold your ear, move it. Also, think about the tip of your nose. Fibrocartilage, on the other hand, is a mixture of cartilaginous tissue, but also has some fibrous tissue mixed in. This allows this kind of tissue to be flexible, yet relatively tough. In fact, the function is it's highly compressible. You're able to push down on it. For this reason, they are located in between your vertebrae, and there forms those little cartilaginous discs or cushion-like discs between each of your different vertebrae bones. Most of you guys, I don't know if you've ever heard it, but these cushion-like discs are called intervertebral discs. And these help prevent your vertebrae from rubbing against each other, so they provide that soft cushion like. If you've ever had a slipped disc or you've ever heard one talk about it, they're talking about this fibrocartilage getting either wore down or again slipped out of place, and then they have bone rubbing on bone, and it's extremely painful. So over here, this is your vertebrae right here. Your intervertebral discs or your discs of fibrocartilage are located in between each of the bones to provide cushion. It compresses because you have the weight of your body pushing down on them. The third type is called dense connective tissue, or other words called dense fibrous tissue. This matrix is mostly made up of collagen fiber, hence it's still relatively tough. It's right there in the middle. But located throughout those collagen fibers are something called fibroblasts. Now, fibroblasts, they're just cells that make fibers. Their function is strength. Hence, why they're located where you see tendons, ligaments, and your dermis. If you don't know what those three things are, tendons attach muscle to bone, ligaments attach bone to other bones, and then the dermis is the lower layer of your skin. Here is a good example where we see both a ligament and tendon. Here we have a tendon connecting the shoulder to your bicep, and then a ligament attaching your clavicle up near your shoulder blade. The fourth type of 5 that we're going to talk about is loose connective tissue. Now, loose connective tissue, hence its name loose, is softer. The reason is because it tends to have more cells and fewer fibers. It is actually the softest of all of the tissues except blood. And there are 3 types: areolar, adipose, and reticular. Let's talk about each one individually. If we talk about areolar, this is soft, pliable tissue like cobwebs. Pliable, think of like Play-Doh. You're able to shape it. It functions as a universal packing tissue, or other words, glue, and it's considered the glue of the body because it helps hold organs in place. It actually cushions and protects body organs that it is found wrapped around. There is a layer of areolar tissue called lamina propria that underlies all mucous membranes. So that is one place that you can find it, on mucous membranes. Other places that you can find it in the body is binding skin to the muscles underneath. You can also find it around blood vessels, nerves, and of course, we've already mentioned you can find it wrapped around the organs of the body because it helps hold them in place. Now, some fun facts about areolar tissue is that all fiber types form a loose network, and it appears to be a lot of empty space, hence why it's got its name. Areola is small and open space. Now, since this tissue has a lot of space, it tends to have a lot of fluid gather in these areas, and it can soak up a ton. This is where whenever you have different swelling in your body and you get something called edema, which is excess fluid, it's going to be located oftentimes in these types of tissues. Now, this is the most widely distributed connective tissue as well. Here's a good example of what it's going to look like. Notice that it does look like little cobwebs. There's strings everywhere, and there's a ton of open space. Adipose. Adipose is just areolar tissue, but it doesn't have a lot of that open space because it is mostly dominated by adipose cells, or basically fat droplets. Fat functions in insulating the body, protecting organs whenever they're jostled around or if you fall, and they help serve as a site of fuel storage because this is where any energy that you don't burn gets stored. It gets stored as fat. Now, you're going to find fat located in the subcutaneous tissue beneath the skin, so underneath your skin. It protects organs like your kidneys, and you often have fat collect in normal areas such as your hips, breasts, and belly. You can even have it collect near your gluteus. Here is a good example of what adipose cells look like. Here you have a normal cell. What happens is the nuclei is pushed to one side, and this very middle is composed of just a big, huge fat droplet. Again, if you had to list another location of where majority of adipose tissues are found, here mostly your breasts are all adipose tissue with your mammillary glands in there. Then you have your last loose connective tissue we're going to talk about, which is reticular. This description is a delicate network of fibers. It has a lot of reticular fibers in it and fibroblasts. It functions by forming the internal framework, also known as stroma, of a lot of organs. These organs, along with other cells, include lymph nodes, the spleen, and bone marrow. So over here, you often find it working in conjunction with other cells. So here we have the white blood cells, and the reticular fibers are going to be the darker purple here that help provide the framework and give it a spot to sit. And the last one, which everyone's always confused about, is blood. Blood is actually a tissue. It goes by the word vascular tissue, which is why we call things vascularized or avascular, meaning if they get a good blood supply. Blood is a tissue because it is formed of blood cells that surround the extracellular matrix, and that extracellular matrix is called blood plasma. Now, blood cells can include red blood cells, which are called erythrocytes, white blood cells, which are leukocytes, and platelets, which is thrombocytes. White blood cells help function in keeping us healthy in our immune system. Platelets help with thrombosis, which is actually basically blood clotting. So these help clot blood. Now, they function as a transport vehicle in the cardiovascular system. They help carry nutrients, waste, and respiratory gases such as O2 and CO2. They are located in blood vessels, located throughout the body. They travel all over. Blood vessels include, but not limited to, arteries and your veins. Now, blood, they're mostly soluble fibers, means they're going to be dissolved in water, and they're actually only visible during clotting. So over here is an example of blood. If you were to put it on a slide, you have your red blood cells, but you also have your white blood cells mixed in there as well, and all this open space is going to be your blood plasma that it is floating in. And that's the end of today's lesson. It was a lot of information. Make sure if you need to rewatch any part of this video, you can. And I would, again, just like on your epithelial tissue, I would start making flashcards or things to study for your test. And if you have any questions, please let me know. And I hope you guys have a great day.